right, everybody. Welcome to the ACJR webinar series with our great guest, Mr. Pete Pachal of the Media Copilot. Thanks everybody for joining. We, of course, are an organization dedicated to, well, it's right in the name, cryptocurrency journalists and researchers. You can catch us on acjr.network. And at ACJR Network on the artist formerly known as Twitter. So everybody, if you're joining, please, if you've got questions for our special guest, Pete, please drop them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on them. And we've got a ton of questions already loaded in the breach for Pete. I hope you're ready, sir.
Oh, I'm ready.
All right. So
Bring it on.
that's the spirit. That's what we like to hear. All right, so I'm going to throw you a softball here. Let's start with, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your career, how you came to found the Media Copilot, and sort of what is the mission?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a lifelong journalist, so I don't feel like I'm penetrating a weird inner sanctum here of a group of journalists. I've been covering mostly tech for 20 plus years. Also did a stint at CoinDesk where I was very um, closely working with the editorial team to cover crypto. I hesitant to say I covered crypto because I wasn't really writing about it all that much, but I was very deep in that space because I was thinking about strategy and all the tools we were using in at CoinDesk. And one of the most satisfying projects I got to do while I was at CoinDesk, actually, which was my last full-time gig, was figure out their AI strategy. So everyone knows in November 2022, ChatGPT landed on the scene, and it was just a huge moment. Very quickly after that, people realized, oh man, this is probably gonna change media. Probably gonna affect what journalists and newsrooms do. So we looked at it. I sort of formed a committee there. We um, looked at a few use cases. I actually wrote the guidelines for CoinDesk. I believe they're still on the site in terms of how the edit team would use it. And we started prototyping a few use cases. So when my time at CoinDesk came to an end, I knew I wanted to do more with AI, and in particular, how it was going to affect media. And there were jobs, but there weren't that many right then. There's probably more today, in terms of like newsroom innovation, newsroom AI. So essentially, like I gave myself a job by launching the Media Copilot, and the whole mission of it is that initially, at least, and still is, to examine the intersection of AI and media and pass on that knowledge. And initially, that was pretty much just the newsletter. So I have a Substack, and I would a couple times a week write about something that I thought was interesting in the realm of AI and media. Still do that. I launched a podcast shortly after, so there's also a Media Copilot podcast. I talk to tech executives, media executives, fellow journalists, and just figure out like what people who are decision makers and actively working in this field are doing with AI, and what are the things they're building. And then the part of the business that I didn't think I was going to do, that's actually ended up being the biggest part of my business, is AI training and education. So shortly after I launched the Media Copilot, like the newsletter, some people reached out to me and were like, "Hey, can you come to my team and explain this AI stuff?" I believe that was literally the first sort of message I got in this vein. And I said, "Sure." And I came out to a couple places in the city and went to their office and had a presentation, and it went really well both times. So I thought, like, okay, great. Well, I can probably do this, like in a little more organized way. So I launched classes early last year in 2024 that quickly blew up to being sort of the biggest part of my business. A lot of people approach me about custom trainings. I've taken on a partner, so I partner with the Upgrade to give even more extensive courses. As opposed to sort of one-off or smaller engagements now, I regularly do sort of 6-week cohorts that are really aimed at transforming the way people work. And again, it's all narrowly focused on journalism and public relations communication. So basically media and media adjacent kind of jobs and use cases. Because AI is kind of like this open-ended software. You can kind of use it for anything, and that's not very helpful when you just kind of like tell people do some stuff. So I think the best parts of what I do in terms of the training is sort of really walking people through use cases and really effective prompting for things they're actually going to do day to day. Oh,
Maybe I
sorry,
should take
sir.
off mute. Okay. So you're at CoinDesk. November 2022 hits. ChatGPT lands in the newsroom more or less. But what was that aha moment where you were just like, oh my God, this is going to change everything for the trade?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I think I had two aha moments. One was actually before ChatGPT came out. So there's an annual conference called ONA done by the Online News Association. And I think it was the fall of that year, it was either August or September of 2022. Um, Someone from CoinDesk attended that particular conference. She came back and gave a sort of an after action report, which talked about like, hey, everyone's talking about AI, and how it can sort of do stuff. And I think in this context, it was probably more about sort of old school AI, the way the AP and Bloomberg were kind of using it for content generation or to aid their certain parts of their operations. So that had more to do with sort of templated stories and data and stuff. But there was probably like some parts of that were trickling down into newsroom tools. So I got sort of interested then on like what it could do for us. And then ChatGPT landed. And the aha moment for me wasn't so much a particular output that I got from trying it out. It was kind of seeing the entire tech blogosphere, tech news sphere, like just jump on it and like really like I read probably at least a dozen of those articles that were like Chat GPT wrote this article and everyone sort of wrote their
Right,
version of
right,
that and had some commentary on it. But there was a lot of obviously excitement and hype, but there was some clarity from that. I'm like, huh. So I think I didn't put this into words in the way smarter people did later, but I did have the thought along the lines of this is the worst it's going to be, and it's already pretty good. So that was kind of the aha moment for me in sort of thinking along those lines, not just like, oh, it could do this. And certainly when it was GPT 3.5, you could pick out a lot of reasons why it wasn't that great. But again, like I don't think, and I don't think it's necessarily my original thought, but somewhere along reading all these 12 things, that sort of occurred to me, like, oh, and if this progresses at a decent pace, it's going to be incredible.
right.
And it certainly has been, maybe not in quite this way as we thought it would be, but everything's gotten a lot better in terms of tools. And, obviously AI is just everywhere now.
Right. So, now I'd like to get into the integration of AI into the craft of journalism. The analogy I always use is, the great fusion guitarist Alan Holdsworth used to say that he used to be criticized a lot for his use of guitar synthesizers and that sort of thing. And somebody said, "Well, doesn't it rob the feel, the emotion, whatever?" And his response, I always thought was a good one, where he says, "No, no, no." He goes, "Everything is technology. A string stretched across a hole is technology, right?" And so, it's how I use these tools to express myself and accelerate and amplify and provide further dimension to my craft. In his case, jazz fusion. So I'd like to start this part of the conversation by asking, I think there's a lot of confusion around. We know that AI is here. We know it's here to stay. It's being integrated in our day-to-day tools. For you, what is the ideal point at which sort of the AI ends and the human begins and that sort of thing?
Wow. That's like probably the hardest question that we're starting off with here. So totally get what the musician is getting at and that whole dilemma. I think there's an essay someone wrote last year. It was Ted Chiang in the New Yorker, and I still point to this in a lot of the trainings I do as sort of a primer that he wrote about why AI isn't going to make art, and whether you agree with that or not. And I think there's reason to disagree. I think in that piece he puts forward a really good definition of AI, which is that software that you can essentially offload choices to. So basically you're relying on on a machine to make choices that you otherwise would have made as a human. And I think in finding which choices to give it and how many is where you find the line you're asking about, right? Because I would say that there is a point where if you're offloading virtually all of what you're doing to a machine, so and I think this is where a lot of people started with how they regarded AI, the current version of AI, which is that, oh, it's giving me an essay, but it's not perfect. There's weird thing. There's M dashes, et cetera. And I think most recent models have fixed a lot of that sort of corporate speak kind of stuff that usually would come out of AI when you asked it to write things. But obviously, it's still not perfect. And basically, you're essentially thinking of AI as like giving you a finished product. And I call this sort of when I teach AI sort of output focused prompting, which first you sort of have to get away from the whole idea. I think it's pretty obvious. You have to get away from the idea that AI is giving you a finished product out of the gate. But also, like, if you want a specific output, you need to sort of master certain prompting techniques and giving it the right context to get you closer to the output. Um, so, so that said, you're offloading a lot of like choices that you would have otherwise made. Now, a lot of it sort of depends on who's asking, and this is where I sort of get into what how journalists use it versus how laymen, for lack of a better term, would use it. So if you're not a writer, if you're not a journalist, you're probably going to offload more of those choices for like a written piece, right? And you're going to kind of want to have it move further the end product further along because you're not going to make those choices anyway. That's kind of the dilemma here is like, do I want an article, or do I want nothing, which is kind of usually what you would have done in the previous world. Now, a journalist obviously is going to produce an article, right? And then it's like, well, how do I want the AI to assist in that? And most of the time, I would argue it's not writing it for you, And so, well, how can it help? Well, lots of ways. There are many ways it can affect your thought process leading up to the writing. Because in journalism, and I wouldn't classify all journalism this way, but certainly a lot of investigative analysis, et cetera, sort of the robust stuff, you're going to want to write most of that yourself, if not all of it. And in fact, most newsrooms with AI policies forbid AI content. Not all, and I think that percentage that allow it will continue to grow. Um, but choosing words is kind of like the if you reduce the essence of journalism like to the acts you're doing, that's kind of important. But um, what I would sort of classify as I have sort of a spectrum of AI writing, and there's a point where it's not writing for you, but it's advising you. And that's often where I sort of steer journalists. So in other words, like those choices you're offloading aren't so much the writing, it is how do I organize my thoughts or before I get to this writing? And AI can be extreme, like, I use it all the time for this. Like it's extremely useful to sort of keep you on task, to keep you to give order to the chaotic thoughts that you might have about a subject that you've researched. Um, Extremely can cut down on a lot of that sort of bouncing around ideas kind of phase.
I wanted to drill down on that a little bit
Yeah, sure.
because so much of the conversation is about production,
Mhm.
right? So much of the conversation around, you know, within journalism, within, my trade, communications, public relations, marketing, is all about the production piece. But what you're getting at is a lot of the pre-production elements, right? The idea of organizing, How would you see AI delving into other delve? That's another supposedly
Huh?
AI. You know?
You as a human have used an AI word.
Wouldn't it be great if I was just a hologram and just went? Zzz? Um, you know, I'm thinking about how AI helps in other tasks like sourcing
Mhm.
or even legal review, right? Does this trip New York Times versus Sullivan, yes or no, kind of thing, right?
Right.
How do you see AI sort of getting into that more? Because I think everybody can kind of intuitively understand the idea of helping to organize thoughts and that sort of thing, but the other important skills in journalism, how might AI melt into those?
Yeah. So, a few different ways, and I think it's important to kind of make some distinctions here in terms of not just, where AI can help, but who should use AI at various points. And I'll tell you what I mean about that. So there is a big focus these days. Well, there's a lot of discussion around what AI is doing to jobs and entry-level jobs in particular. And the long-term concern for most organizations is that, well, if AI can do these kind of menial tasks that you would have normally assigned to a junior staffer or an intern, what is that going to do to your pipeline, your talent pipeline? Or how do you get senior people if junior people can't get these key experience? And honestly, we haven't really fully answered that.
Oh, we
Uh,
we ask that question in my trade all the time. I mean, when you think about 15 years ago, 10 to 15% of a PR office's billable revenue was clipping out news clippings,
sure.
pasting them, photocopying them, and sending them to a client. Obviously, that revenue is not there, right?
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
that entry level job is no longer there, and I imagine it's the same. It's very similar in the newsroom, where it's like if that initial copy is being generated by a machine, right? So
Yeah, for straight up news stories and rewriting press releases, AI can be very good, if not better, than an intern doing a similar job. Now, again, I'm talking about just the craft of writing. There are aspects to journalism, such as, just calling sources,
yeah.
the core practice of it, of getting people to trust you and then confiding you with information, that simply can't be done by a machine. I mean, I can't imagine it anyway until we get to like some crazy advanced AI and then you're into sci-fi world. But
I would imagine I might ask it, who would be a very good authority to talk about ocean acidification or
yeah,
something
in
like that?
fact, that's a use case I often teach in my
Right.
classes. And so sourcing is actually a great use case, but it depends on your prompting and it depends on the models you use. So there's a nice simple piece of advice I can give about using AI models, and one is that when you use deep research, which is really just a sort of agentic use case in thinking models. But when you use one of those models to do a task, it's going to prioritize thoroughness over speed. And so generally, when you're doing that kind of research, you're going to want to use a thinking model or a deep research tool. And I think there's actually a very recent article, it's kind of a study, but the Columbia Journalism Review did with exactly this use case, which was, well, it wasn't exactly this use case. It was basically looking at academic papers and science journalism. And it looked at a bunch of these, I guess, apps, you could call them, services that use AI to like look at academic papers and give you answer questions for you. And the problem with, I think, some of these app layers, I think one of the takeaways for me was that you don't really know the model and you don't really know the prompting, other than what your sort of your basic prompting when you come to it. So I do think, and again, this is a little self-serving because I teach this stuff, but it is like you kind of need that, at least it's not that advanced, but you need to sort of be able to discern between models and some of these fundamental tools, like the difference between basic chat and deep research and browser agents to really use AI effectively, I think, in the research phase. And I think this pairs well with a journalistic mindset, right? Because you should always be skeptical. And I think that the sourcing, well, and this doesn't just apply to sourcing, but to a lot of use cases in the research and sort of story ideation phase, a lot of it sort of depends on like using them effectively depends on experience. And here, this is kind of what I was getting at earlier with like what senior like it's almost like your seniority level should unlock more AI usage in an ideal world. Certainly, your experience in a field will better inform the outputs you get. In other words, you'll have more judgment, better judgment about is the AI output useful or not, right? So if you're brand new to a field, you're covering something, AI can be a little bit helpful at sourcing, but you won't really have a good sense of who, like what kinds of sources are even credible or what have you. So if it spits back a list of sources to you, you don't have a lot of to go on there. It's probably more helpful than just kind of randomly Google searching. I'll give it that, but it's at least saving you the trouble of doing that. But it gets a lot more useful if you actually do know the field. And I'll say this as a tech journalist, like I think most journalists get into a comfortable area of like you have your go-to sources on something, and because of deadlines or whatever, yeah, you always want to go beyond it, but that's rarer than you would like because of just pressures. AI, I think, can really enable like that expansion because you're going to be able to like get good results and evaluate them. You'll be like, oh yeah, I've seen this name or this person's experience comports with, this people I know of in the area that have similar experience, etc. So I think used properly, it can expand a senior person sort of source network really, really well and probably get you to think about things and explore different angles that you might not otherwise have. So I think, and again, this sort of gets to the fundamental aspect of it of should you use AI for this task and then how, right? And I sort of loosely put together, it was kind of a back of the envelope thing, but a flow chart almost, and when using AI, you kind of have to sometimes think about is is the struggle the point, in the sense of like, is using AI here going to get the person using it to neglect a muscle they need to work? And usually that's going to apply to more inexperienced people, right? So like having them sort of judiciously use AI, again, I don't know if forbidding it works because then it leads to sort of shadow AI, but I
Right.
think at least having policies that address that concern of like, oh, maybe like this person needs to rewrite this press release a few times before they can understand whether or not the output of an AI that's rewriting the press release is actually any good.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
but this inspires another question where I noticed, for example, on CoinDesk articles, right? You see that you'll see somebody's byline, and then next to it it says something like AI boost or something like that, right? So there's clearly a policy there that is kind of a duty to disclose.
Right.
What is your opinion on this in terms of a journalist's duty to disclose as to whether or not AI in any capacity was used to generate a piece? Or is it just going to be such a part of the workflow that it's going to be almost like saying you have to disclose that you used Google Docs or something, right?
Yeah, I think it's kind of more the latter, or it's evolving into that. Now, I think it depends on exactly how you're using it. Now, you can get back to kind of like the writing and the research, and basically, like I divide sort of the journalistic workflow, the production workflow, I guess it's a content workflow, into like three parts. You think of it as a pipeline. So you have all the stuff we've been talking about, which is ideation, research, everything that's happening before you write the story. Then there's the actual writing of the story, which is a narrow but obviously very important part. And then there's everything afterward, which is kind of the editing. I guess maybe the editing could be more considered the middle, but certainly the distribution, the publishing, promotion of the article, all of that sort of that third part of the pipeline. So AI is very helpful, most helpful probably at this phase in its development on the two ends, and less so in the middle. Again, I think that's slowly changing, We're starting to see more AI help in the middle, but disclosure, I think, happens. Disclosure is more important, most important in that middle piece. And when I say disclosure, I think it's really important that outlets don't just disclose that AI played a role, they need to disclose exactly what role it played. And that doesn't necessarily have to be on the article page itself, although I do think having more than just AI assisted or AI boosted or AI intelligence is probably necessary. And I think most places do this now. They'll have like, in addition to a byline, they'll have like a sentence, usually in italics, either at the top or the bottom, that's like, this was generated by AI, then reviewed and added to and edited by humans, or some variant, depending on what the process is. And I feel like that is really important because like understanding like how did they use AI in the generation of the copy is really revelatory about like how what the audience should be thinking about it. Now, if AI is used in that first part, like the what we were talking about, I don't necessarily think it's that necessary to disclose. I think there's almost an expectation now. You're at least using like an AI search engine at some point, probably on any story you're writing. Does that need to be disclosed? Probably not. I think again, depending on the policy of the newsroom, and I think and they all should, but most do deal with like how much copy from that you're generating in that phase can actually go into the actual article. And usually it's none, but sometimes it's not. So that's again, once it starts, AI generated stuff starts leaking in, that's when disclosure becomes important. If AI is enabling something in that phase that you otherwise would not be able to do, as opposed to just saving you time, I think that's a very helpful way to think about like that's probably raising another flag of like, oh, you should probably disclose that, hey, there were 10,000 documents in this that inform this story. I used an AI to sort them, etc. And you would just put that in again, sort of as a one-off disclosure in the article. And then in the third phase, the distribution, the publishing, I don't think, like, again, use cases can be very specific here, but broadly, I don't think you really need to disclose. I think for social copy, there's almost an expectation now that AI is helping you write. Um, I'll even confess that I've used AI certainly more often to write like even LinkedIn posts, not in their entirety, and certainly I look at them, etc. But it is usually something that is based on an article that I wrote as a human, and it just feels weird to me to need to disclose that on a LinkedIn post when really like there's been studies like over half the stuff on LinkedIn is there's AI copy in it, right? And then when you get down to tweets, I mean, it's like, does anyone think that all these tweets from outlets are all just like human written? Like, and where would you even put that disclosure? So there's certainly a social component there, but again, I think there's exceptions to this rule on that level. Again, if you're doing something that was posted by a human and had a lot of authenticity to it, I think there might be some disclosure that's probably a good idea, if not necessarily mandated. But
Are,
again,
are
like
we
I
gonna
said,
are we gonna start
hard.
seeing this kind of I don't know, no machines were used in the production of this copy or something like that? Is there going to be like this move towards like I don't know, organic or artisanal journalism and some or something that was AI created? I'm wondering, are we gonna see outlets try to differentiate themselves in this way, or is it one of those things where AI is going to be all over it? It's just that some organizations are going to be smarter at it than others.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go that far, even though I think that's a popular view in that like, oh, there's just going to be sort of a select bit of organic stuff and the rest of it's going to be synthetic. I think if you zoomed out to the entire content ecosystem, that will be true simply because of the nature of AI means that the cost of producing quote unquote content is going to zero. But if you confine yourself to the media and newsrooms, I think there's always going to be an expectation that humans are doing this, even if not every aspect of what they're doing is entirely human, that they're offloading some of that to AI. But and the reason for this, I think, is that as studies have shown, the relationship with the audience changes when you start having AI as essentially a co-author. So what we were talking about in disclosing, if you disclose, hey, this article was written by AI or partially written by AI or AI played some significant role, there is a sudden sort of eyebrow raise on the part of the audience. It just is. I mean, AI content is it doesn't matter how good it is. It's just AI content is associated with, oh, this is soulless, this is bad quality, this is all about efficiency and not actually speaking to me. So you need to sort of understand that trade-off for whatever content you're using it for. And this is why for almost all use cases at quote unquote legit outlets right now, it's on the periphery. It's for stuff that is usually very functional, as opposed to, a analytical piece, an opinion piece, pieces that there'd be a high expectation of that a human authored them. But if something's very functional, if you're basically essentially doing an aggregated news story, you know, and you use that's a good use case for AI because it's one, very simple to do. And two, that sort of inherent judgment the audience will have is probably blunted. They're probably like, well, it's just telling me about this Sydney Sweeney ad campaign. It's not giving me a take, even though there's probably a host of takes on that same site because of whatever the issue. But you can, I think you can kind of quote unquote get away with that. And when I say get away with that, it's more that can you have content that is going to fulfill a business purpose that's partially written by AI? I think you can, again, as long as it's not your core content. And we're seeing this more and more. So ESPN is using AI as the primary author for sports, again, on the periphery that it wouldn't have otherwise covered. You're seeing it a little bit in some publications like Fortune. Fortune is now using AI to help generate some quasi-functional stuff. I don't think it's like aggregated news, but it is that, oh, it's informing you about something, and then an author comes in and adds substantially to it. So Semaphore is arguably doing this with its semaphore signals. And they're all sort of disclosing in different ways, but it is there's an expectation certainly that the thing is checked, and often it's more than checked. It has been significantly edited and even added to, so it's more like a co-byline situation. And
So
we'll see how that goes.
so we're rapidly heading into a future where it's like it's less about newsrooms using like you know a typical stack of AI tools like kind of off the shelf. It sounds like what you're talking about is that multiple newsrooms are going to have their own instances of these LLMs or own instances of these tools that are just going to be proprietary to each newsroom.
Yeah,
I'm kind of trying to figure out the build versus buy equation here in terms of a newsroom,
well, at the heart of this is that an AI that knows you and by extension knows your brand is going to always do better
right?
than an AI that doesn't. So every brand wants that ability. Every brand also cares about their data, and you need to get an AI that is uh, essentially tailored to you. Who's going to do better than that? Is it going to be something that is more built in-house around either an open source model, or you can do it with a commercial model and just sort of commit to that model? Um, uh, um, it probably, that's going to be a better solution than using one of these tools, like a tool that is based on one of these. Again, that's sort of what I was getting at earlier, that once you have a platform that you are that is more of a third party, it's sort of inherently going to give another variable into like how can this keep up with you? Is there enough transparency to get the most out of the tool? It's not to say they're all bad. It's just inherently sort of complicates the relationship. Um, so 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 yes, I mean, I think any newsroom that really wants to use this in a way that isn't just piecemeal is going to need some system-wide solution. How that sort of plays out, again, I think today it's probably better. It's probably going to give you more flexibility and direct control if you are as close to um, well, what do they call it? As close to the metal as
Right, right,
possible,
right.
right?
Yeah, right.
And so that would mean, either getting an open source model or building, if you can, getting like one of these enterprise plans with one of the major model providers. But I'd be love to hear if people are thinking about that differently, if they're having good experiences with third parties. And there are very media specific third parties that are doing platform stuff that do have some good experiences. Certainly, like Noda is a leader here, so they've have their own platform that's really good at content remixing, and they've added a lot of other abilities within that tool suite that they've developed. There's a host of others. There's certainly like business solutions, like stuff you would attach to the business side, like bot protection and charging bots to access your content, which is a whole nother aspect of the media business. So there are like, so I'm not saying for all of your AI needs as a publication you would want to pick one model, but certainly for content, you're going to want some consistency there. You don't want everyone, some people using Claude and some people using ChatGPT or some people using some third party thing. I think you're going to want to have a certain amount of consistency there because you're going to want the data that you share with these AIs to be the same data. And yeah, you could share it with everything, but I mean, I don't think many brands are in a hurry to like unleash their data to like a half dozen AI models.
Right. So you mentioned Fortune, ESPN, Semaphore. Recognizing those aren't necessarily endorsements, who is doing it right, in your opinion?
In terms of AI experiences or
Yeah,
just in content?
in terms of integrating AI, making it useful, accelerating the craft of journalism, being very audience focused. Who's really doing it right out there?
I think there's brands that are doing different aspects of what you're asking about well. So working backwards from user experience, I would say Time is actually doing a pretty good job of integrating AI into its platform and its website in a way that is pretty user friendly, that guarantees the quality. So they do a couple of different things. They have sort of a built-in summarizer that for some of their longer pieces, obviously Time does a lot of long pieces, can summarize it at different lengths. Um, and it's actually a really good experience, and the articles look good. But the reason for that is that it's actually human reviewed. So that's great. Again, that's as a user, that's great. Sounds great. As a person that would be in charge of that business, I'd be constantly jumping up and down saying this doesn't scale. You can't have like we need an AI to do this on the fly for all of our articles for this to be a business positive thing. And I'm sure they're working on it, but that that requires good AI, certainly. And I'm not sure if we're there yet. And then it also requires a, a human judgment to say this is okay, right? And with the knowledge that it's probably not going to be okay in some instance in the future. So this is a thing where it's a good criticism of AI, obviously, is that it gets things wrong sometimes. And it's like, well, so do humans.
Right.
And can you can you set a bar so that you're not setting it too high? Like basically you're setting it higher for the machine than you are for the person. Is that fair? Probably not. That said, we all have our biases, and that, again, I haven't looked at statistics, but intuitively, I would think that self-driving cars are probably safer than human-driven ones. But if a self-driving car accidentally hits a human, that's a massive story. And the PR fallout from that might still torpedo the technology, even if statistically so it's a similar thing with AI screwing up articles. I think because of the nature of AI and it misses things that seem really obvious to us humans with all of our experience in the real world. Again, I'm not sure if that's probably a bias, but it's probably a justified bias. You know what I mean? Like we're humans writing things for humans. If a machine is coming in and presuming something that simply is alien to the human experience, I think it's a fair criticism to say like that's a pretty big error. Like the audience isn't machines that are like bumbling around the world. The audience is a human being, and if we say things that no human would say, it's we just look really stupid. So there's um, different categories of errors, I guess I would say. So it's not just is the error rate higher or lower. If you can get away from some of those category errors as well, then I think you've got a fair case to make that you can let AI do its thing. Sorry, I'm getting a little far afield from your question of
Who's doing it right?
who's doing
Yeah.
it right. So I mentioned time. I would say I think Semaphore. I already mentioned them, but I haven't actually checked in with them in quite a while, so I'm not sure how much of a role the AI plays um, in the actual writing. But the idea that it can get a lot of information for the journalist in multiple languages, and they seem to have systemized that, that is very cool. So, for the longest time, I mean, internet data just broadly is skews Western. I mean, this is the inherent biases in internet data. It skews Western, it skews English speaking because that's sort of where all the tech is concentrated. And um, to be able to very quickly not just like we've had over a decade we could translate an article, of course, but to have a net that translates already, like when I cast my net out into the web to find articles about the thing I'm writing about, to be able to have a translation ability within that net, that's a step change in like my ability to do things. So
Because now your sourcing just went exponential,
exactly. So I
right?
don't have to like immediately take things manually one by one. And, even the search itself wouldn't work because I'm searching in English, so having the AI having its ability to go out and do that, that's really helpful as a tool. So they're doing some really good stuff on the sort of the journalism sourcing and translation and research. Um, and as far as sort of like novel experiences, I do like the idea of these audio summaries. So sometimes I already mentioned them, they're doing one, but also Business Insider's doing one. It'll be if you go to their homepage,
Right,
it'll
right.
it'll basically give you a 2 minute like what's going on. Um, or something along those lines. And it just sort of like it's essentially summarizing its top news stories of the day, I think, from its most popular feed. And that's not bad. I would say that experience being confined to a website makes no sense because as a person surfing the web, I'm interacting visually. I'm mostly looking at articles. But if they can sort of master the idea of like, oh, this is going to be in a podcast feed, this is going to go to, your Amazon or your Google speaker, like, just sort of be there, then you might have something,
Well,
So
what's been really effective for me has been Google LM or Notebook
mm,
LM, where I
and
just
Notebook LM is great.
right where I just feed it a whole bunch of sources, and then it summarizes it using two jaunty NPR sounding people,
Yeah.
batting it back and forth. And
Yeah.
as somebody who's primarily an auditory learner, it's been really helpful for me in terms of you know helping me distill complex ideas, which of course in crypto journalism we often have to master everything from the technology to the economics to to all of it. I want to make sure we get to Brad's question here. Brad asks, how does the AI in journalism dovetail with the independent journalism movement? I imagine he's talking about things like, you know, the Matt Taibbis of the world pulling the ripcord, starting their Substacks, and that sort of thing. How does that, how do the two sort of collide here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in a fairly ad hoc way right now. And the reason for that is that if you're going independent and you are, essentially gambling that your audience or the audience you can cultivate is going to be something that's valuable and you can build a business around, human voice is really important. So that whole audience expectation thing I mentioned is like they're going to want to hear from you. Like they're not obviously not coming to you for commodity news or what have you. Now, all that said, like I remember I said the pipeline, like there's a lot you can do on those two zones of, the research, the ideation, and even I would say beyond that on a single story, like what does your operation look like with AI built into your story generation phase as well as your distribution phase. So I can obviously speak personally to this. I use AI a lot in those phases, and I have plans to go further with that. A lot of the concepts I've sort of articulated here are things I'm thinking through right now with my own website and thinking about like what role an AI byline would play if I were to produce more content. I already use AI a little bit in the content I do, so like I said, a lot of my business is sort of aimed at education, and so that takes up a lot of my time. So it doesn't leave me a lot of time to write during the week. And so what I end up doing is like I'd like to round up the news, and I have an AI do a lot of that writing for me. And that I have a disclosure, and I obviously edit carefully each one of those blurbs. Essentially, that makes blurbs for me, and I almost always add some insight that I have about it after I've read the blurb that the AI has produced.
Right.
And over time, I've edited sort of its prompting, and it does a decent job of confining itself to a certain length. And but I also see that it also similar writing patterns come up again and again, and part of this is the writing samples I've given it. So it's like as you figure out your process to if you are using AI in your content process, like it requires a certain amount of iteration as you sort of go through and sort of make it better with either models or better prompting or better samples. So it's hardly ever sort of a one and done, but it can be pretty helpful.
Right. Well, we're almost at time, and I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity, I guess, to do two things. One is, what is the most important thing this audience can do when they hang up from this? They're going to go back to their work, back to their desks. What do you most want them to do? And then number two, I understand that we have a discount code for your seminars and that sort of thing. I want to make sure that people know that that's coming as well. So let's start with number one. What do you most want people to do when they hang up?
That's a great question, and I should give the self-serving advice of like go get some training and then I'll give you the training code. But it's less about the training and really more about if you've been skeptical of AI, if it's not playing that big of a role in your work right now, think about why you have skepticism, and not that there's not good reason to be skeptical. There is, but like really try to sort of break that down and think about, well, how can I think about this if I wanted to set it up for success? Because surely you've heard about it helping a lot of people with various aspects of your work. Where are the places that you would like to deploy it? And again, I think for most journalists, that's usually not the writing, and I think everyone, like I say, defaults to that. So get away from that mentality of like, oh, it's got to give you outputs. Actually, again, part of the lessons that I teach, AI is much better thought of as a collaborator. And there are so many collaborative use cases. I obviously do a lot of them in my courses, but I mean, once you get into that zone, think about that. So basically, I guess my advice is, um, think about how do I set this up for success, and how do I uh, adjust my thinking from AI just giving me things to AI being something I want to collaborate with. So that said, I have a lot of material about that in the courses that I teach. So, and I've got an upcoming course. I'm going to drop the link in the chat here, and it's a 6 week course. It starts in September, and 6 weeks. Oh my God, it's so long. It's not really that long because it's only really an hour a week. And one of the best things about it is that the final hour, the last lesson, is always about projects. So every student will get help, one-on-one coaching to create a project. So essentially, create your own AI workflow or AI tool, and we'll help you with that to make sure it's as effective as possible. And from that tool, you will get so much hands-on experience. Like, I mean, you're kind of guaranteed to transform the way you work in some way, simply by going through that project. And of course, you're going to get tons of use cases. You're going to get all the material. We have, everything's recorded. You're going to get all the decks, etc. So we think it's really helpful. There's a lot of value to be unlocked in the course. Um, and for anyone attending, I will also drop for you a discount code. So you can get 25% off. And this is actually a level of discount people can't get anymore, but you can, uh, because we had the 25% early bird going on up until the end of August. It ended, but for anyone here, you can get it with the code I just dropped in the chat. So it's well, I won't say it. It's like friends25JO, but no one's gonna remember that. But yeah, like if you're into it, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I am at pete@mediacopilot.ai. I'll drop that email in the chat. And there we go. If I could type. There I am. Feel free to drop me a note anytime or on LinkedIn. I suppose you should drop my profile too. But yeah, I hope if you are only dabbling with AI, I've managed to sort of change your thinking a little bit about it. And because I'm certainly like convinced more than ever, it's definitely going to change media for a host of reasons, some of which we didn't even get into here. But it's certainly going to change the way journalists work, and you can be a part of that. I think using these tools, sharing what you know and what works for you is a big part of like how that's happening today. So dive in.
All right. Pete Paschal of Media Copilot. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir.
All right. We're out.
We're out. Amazing. Thanks for the great interview.
Thanks a lot. No, this has been great. I'll so many other questions I have. I'll bug you offline.
Please do. Please do. Anytime.
All right. Have a good one. Ciao.
Cheers, Phil. See ya.